All right, War of 1812. So, Madison begins to prepare for war. He called Congress into session the fall of 1811. Democratic Republicans dominated the Congress, but was divided on a course of action. Many were reluctant to fight the British, especially those in the mid Atlantic and New York area. States' writers were afraid that it would lead to a more powerful federal government. But war was supported by a group known as the War Hawks, young Republicans who supported war, including Speaker of the House Henry Clay, whom we will talk about after fall break. One of my favorite people in history, actually. Uh, Distant relative, actually. Some people think I have his hairline. Um, so, under the leadership of Henry Clay, and by the way, Abraham Lincoln's a war hawk too. The House votes to declare war 79 to 49, and in the Senate 19 to 13. Federalists opposed the war because they said that France was the real enemy. You remember that split before, pro-British versus pro-French. Um, so this will actually lead to a Republican mob in Baltimore attacking a Federalist editor. That's how angry people were about this. So we are now at war with Great Britain for the second time in 50 years. This time the war is over trade and arming the Native Americans. At first, we concentrated our military efforts on Canada. We saw Canada as poorly defended and thought that Quebec would rebel against the British. The idea was to hold Canada to hostage in order to get concessions. This failed miserably. Every time we've tried to invade Canada, we have gotten our butts kicked. I think we can take them now. The British soon blockaded our ports. On August 1814, the British actually captured Washington, D.C. Madison was actually in the field with the troops, actually pretending to be a military commander. Fortunately, Dolly Madison, excuse me, saved a very famous portrait of George Washington. In fact, she was about to host a dinner party when they had to flee. The British officers came in, ate the food, and then set the White House on fire and took many things from the White House as souvenirs. We fought for years to get some of that stuff back. The British also tried to take Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor, which will lead to the Star Spangled Banner written by Francis Scott Key. Fun fact, when that was first made, our official national anthem didn't actually have a tune. So different people sang it to different tunes. So, you think of some of the classic tunes of the time, someone probably sang the national anthem to that. The U.S. will finally defeat the British at New Orleans under Andrew Jackson, who got help from Native Americans. And when we see Jackson's history with Native Americans, that's surprising, and French pirates. He also insulted Kentuckians at this point, and that's why in Kentucky we don't like him. The war technically had ended 2 weeks earlier, but let's be honest, if the British had won at New Orleans, they would have kept going. The Treaty of Ghent actually ends the war. It'll be negotiated by John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay and some others. While all this is going on, the Federalists, who are basically just a Northeast party, the Federalists meet at the Hartford Convention, and they made some demands of the government. They wanted a sectional veto, or then they threatened to secede from the Union if they didn't get it. They wanted to strengthen New England's power in the Union. They wanted a 2/3 majority for commercial regulations and to admit states. This will basically kill the Federalist Party because they were seen as very unpatriotic. After the War of 1812, Madison wanted to expand the size of the military, which was pretty important. He also supported a national bank and high tariffs, so he's actually bringing back some of the old Federalist ideas and some of the old Federalist agenda because the Federalist Party was basically dead, so he can now take the best parts of both systems. So Madison wants to combine Jeffersonian democracy with some Hamiltonian economics. And this will create a small period of nonpartisanship um, called the era of good feelings. You'll see more about that in the video. Um, and so when Madison finishes, he wins re-election pretty handily. He will go on a goodwill tour of the country, mainly because the White House had to be rebuilt. James Monroe will follow Madison. Monroe is definitely the last of the founding fathers generation. He was the last to wear the wig and breeches. Um, James Monroe kind of brought together that nonpartisan idea. He appointed former Federalists like John Quincy Adams Secretary of State, and he made appointments from different regions of the country. It was Monroe who goes on the Goodwill tour of the country, going as far west as Detroit. This is, as I mentioned, the era of good feelings. Monroe was known for his lavish entertainment at the Executive Mansion. He had the exterior painted bright white. He will be the bridge to a new generation of politicians like Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and Henry Clay. This was definitely an era of diplomatic achievements. We had the Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817, which limited British and U.S. armaments on the Great Lake. It's hard to imagine this now, but we had a lot of armaments, and so did the British on the lakes. We set the 49th parallel as the boundary with Canada, and we received fishing rights off of Newfoundland. We also agreed to jointly occupy the Oregon Territory, which will actually lead to conflict later. In March of 1818, Andrew Jackson, federal general, will lead a raid into Spanish Florida, nominally to attack the Seminoles, but while he was there, he figured, what the hell? He took 2 Spanish forts. Spain said, this isn't worth it. They actually ceded Florida to us, which is, thanks a lot. It's Florida. And we forced the Spanish to recognize the Louisiana Purchase, so they gave up their claim. In 1819, we have the Adams-Onis Treaty with Spain. And in 1823, probably the most famous thing from Monroe is the Monroe Doctrine. Now, this is a little bit complicated. So what's actually going on is in Europe, this is the post-Napoleonic War era. And basically what the powers of Europe wanted was a return to the status quo, was the return to legitimate monarchs. And basically the thought was that revolution was bad. The foreign minister of Austria put forth a doctrine known as the Principles of Legitimacy, which basically said European powers had the right to intervene anywhere a legitimate government was being trying to be overthrown. Now, the British were part of this for a while, but they didn't like the idea of interfering in European and other countries. They're like, if you want us to come in and smack France around, we're happy to do that, but we don't want to be involved. Well, what eventually happens, in fact, they actually bring France into the Quintuple Alliance. Well, this is the time in South America where, you have Jose de San Martin and Simon Bolivar. They are beginning the revolutions in South and Central America. Well, Metternich and others in Europe didn't like that. So what they wanted to do was to put together a Europe-wide army in order to cross the ocean and put down the revolutions in Central and South America. Well, the British didn't like this idea because the British were making all kinds of money on trade with Central and South America since they started to throw off the yoke of their colonial oppressors. So they wanted things to stay the same. So the British actually got in contact with the U.S. government, and they said, hey, neither one of us want these Europeans to interfere in the Western Hemisphere. And so what Britain wanted to do was to put out a joint proclamation with the United States that said, hands off, you guys aren't coming over here. Well, the War of 1812 had just recently ended, right? So we didn't trust them. So Monroe acts alone, and really it's John Quincy Adams that does the work on this, and basically said the Monroe Doctrine says the old world and the new world are forever separate. The Western Hemisphere is our hemisphere, and that Europe needs to stay out. That's the Monroe Doctrine. It's actually going to cause a lot of trouble later when Teddy Roosevelt adds his Roosevelt Corollary. So that's probably the most famous thing to come out of it. It's not very quotable, though, as the video will talk about. The 1800s also saw innovations like the cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney, which ironically made it easier to grow and pick cotton, but also led to an explosion of slave labor. It did increase cotton production. We also saw water-powered mills. This is a time where the Supreme Court becomes more and more powerful. We do have a panic in 1819. From 1815 to 1818, the number of banks doubled in this country from 200 to 400. But soon the price of cotton and agricultural goods dropped. This crisis hurt financial institutions. Most regions were affected. Cities were hurt. 3 out of 4 were unemployed in Philadelphia, for example. The pauper population of New York increased from 8,000 to 13,000 a year. You had to have a license to be a pauper. So, there are a lot of things kind of going on. We also, in 1819, will have the Missouri Compromise. I talk about it more, I think, in the next videos. It's one of Henry Clay's greatest achievements. Missouri applied for admission as slave state. Congressman John Talmadge of New York demanded that Missouri ban the importation of slaves. They didn't do that. So the Northeast opposed the admission of Missouri as a slave state. Talmadge passed a bill in the House to stop Missouri as a slave state. It's defeated in the Senate. Finally, a compromise was worked out. Missouri comes in as a slave state, and Maine breaks away from those people in Massachusetts and becomes a free state, thus keeping the balance. They then also set the 3630 latitude line, as above it would be free, below it could be slave states. Also in the summer of 1822, we have the Denmark-Vesey Rebellion. This was a free black man in Charleston. He was arrested, tried, and executed for leading a slave insurrection, even though basically they said that he had gotten free and slaves to conspire together. They allegedly planned to burn the city and flee to Haiti. The evidence was not very strong, to be honest, but fear kind of has a way to do that. When you get more and more slaves, you have a great fear of slave rebellion. You can actually see that back all the way in the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic. What it would lead to is more restrictions on slaves. So that's basically the Jeffersonian era. I'm going to have some other videos to help explain some of the other things. Obviously, I didn't go too far into the War of 1812, so I'm going to have a video or something that helps explain that a little bit more. But that ends basically the first half of class. So look for the test sometime this next week. I'll get that posted. I'll still be posting more information about the paper. I've heard from some of you about what you want to do as papers. Really good choices so far. Anyway, that's it for now. I think next after the test will be the market revolution. I've got to check your book and I got to check the syllabus because things are a little out of order. Anyway, like I said, I hope everyone gets to enjoy Monday and Tuesday as fall break. Take yourself a little rest. Try to recharge. This is a very stressful time for all of us. Remember, I'm here to help. So if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'm here. So thanks a lot. Talk to you next time.